Robin Robbins from the ManagedServicesBlueprint.com website, and in this blog post, it's actually going to be one in a series of how to overcome objections, common sales objections that you're having. And if you recall, a couple weeks ago, I had a teleseminar with the country's top negotiations coach, which is Jim Camp. He wrote the book Start With No. And we got some feedback from people who wanted to get further explanation on how to overcome objections, some more specific examples. So what I decided to do is put together this series. So right below me on the video, there's a little mini worksheet. And you can see I've got notes on mine. So I'd recommend you download that and print it out, because I'm going to give you some of the blanks to fill in. So how to overcome common sales objections when you're selling managed services. This is going to be part one. And the first thing I want you to realize is that objections aren't necessarily bad or negative. They're actually buying signs. So the first blank I want you to fill in your little worksheet that hopefully you downloaded is objections are simply unanswered questions or they're misunderstandings. So that's what I want you to write down. They are unanswered questions or they're misunderstandings. So when a prospect gives you an objection, really what they're doing is giving you an insight into their thought patterns, their process, sort of their viewpoint of things. So again, it's not a bad thing if you embrace it as that it's just an unanswered question or an opportunity for you to clarify a misunderstanding. Okay? The second thing, the best way to overcome objections is to kill them when they're small, and you want to fill that in on your blank, or you can even put avoid them in advance. All right? So we're going to talk about that a little bit more down on your quick action list. But the best way to overcome an objection is to kill it in advance by pre-framing or by just avoiding it, not raising objections in the beginning. And again, I'm going to give you an example of what I mean by that. The third thing is your biggest concern shouldn't be objections. It actually should be indifference. And I want you to write that down. That's the third fill in the blank. Your biggest concern should be indifference, not objections, because objections, like I said, are a buying signal. They are the prospect saying, here's my viewpoint, I don't quite understand something, here's a concern I have, which is means that they're actively participating, they're interested in what you're saying, and so it is a buying signal. If they don't have any objections, that kind of makes me nervous sometimes. It means that they're probably indifferent to what you are selling. Because if they're not raising objections, they're not asking questions, they're not fully engaged. And again, if you look at objections that way, you're going to have a lot more success in dealing with them. So let me go down your quick action list here. The first thing is, when I talked about avoiding objections in the first place, use educational direct response marketing to position yourself as an in-demand consultant and authority on your topic, not just another salesperson. So what do I mean by that? Well, throughout the blueprint and even on the audio CDs we offer on our site, I talk a lot about using educational direct response marketing. And what that is that's publishing free reports or books, doing even educational videos like this blog post you're watching. And what that does is it puts you in a position of being a consultant rather than a salesperson. And it provides value in advance. And so the whole goal is to make that prospect perceive you differently before you even sit down with them. And that's why I teach my clients to use things like shock and awe boxes, and that's a marketing kit that you would send to a prospect in advance that would pre-sell and pre-qualify that prospect before you even step in the door, and let your marketing do that work, okay? So that would be number one. Make sure you're positioning yourself properly from the beginning, because how you're introduced to that prospect, it has a lot to do with how they're going to treat you during that sales process, okay? Number two, neediness is your biggest enemy in selling. So if you desperately need that sale, the prospect's going to know, and it's like a dog smelling fear. They're going to know, and they're going to treat you differently. So one of the things I tell my clients to do, and I learned this from my good friend Martin Howie as a tip, is before you go to meet with that prospect or before you get on the phone, just remember this one thing. You didn't have the sale before. So if you don't win it, you're no worse off. You just didn't win the sale. So take the pressure off yourself and don't be so needy. Number three, go into every meeting with a prospect with zero assumptions. It's really important because assumptions are your baggage. So you sit down with a prospect, and if you automatically assume that price is going to be a concern, or that they're going to be concerned about signing a 3-year contract, or they're only going to want break fix, or they're whatever it is that you've run into before. If you go in with those assumptions, you're going in with baggage, and you're not going to ask questions, not the right questions, and you're going to make assumptions, which are really dangerous. And we all know in sales, the key to being a good salesperson is listening. Okay, listening to what the prospect wants, specifically what their concerns are, what their experience has been in the past, what they're looking for. And when you come in with assumptions, you're going to alter your sales presentation because you're going to be assuming they think or believe certain things. And you don't want to do that, especially in one-on-one selling. Now in marketing, you have to make certain assumptions because we have to overcome objections and put together sales presentations for a mass of people. But when you're sitting down one-on-one with a prospect, don't go in with any assumptions. Okay, number 4, when you first meet with a prospect, do not start talking about all the things you do. And when I've done role playing with managed service providers, the one thing I notice is they sit down with the prospect and they try and do a little rapport building, look at pictures like my dog pictures behind me and mention something about dogs. Oh, you got Jack Russell's, great, so do we, whatever. And then after that, they just go in and launch into this whole spiel about who their company is, what they do, the services they provide. They start talking about their managed services, how they're proactive and 24/7 monitoring, and they go into all this stuff. And what they're doing is actually raising objections because, as I noted here on your workbook, I think it was Emerson that said it, for every good, there's a bad. Okay? So if you sit down with a prospect and you start puking all over them about, hey, managed services, 24/7, antivirus, we're going to do this, we're going to replace your hardware, all this stuff, what you're actually doing in many cases is raising objections before they've even become an objection, because you haven't really sat down and fully understand what that prospect wants, what they need, and you've got to make sure that you are getting that prospect to see a clear vision of what they want, what they don't want, and that's your job as a consultant by asking the right questions and listening, taking good notes, going deep on those questions, because then you're going in with 0 assumptions and you get a better, clear picture of what they want. And when you go in and you start firing away on solutions and what you do, what you're actually doing is raising objections. Okay, so that's what I was talking about earlier when I was saying the best way to kill an objection or the best way to avoid an objection is to avoid it in advance or kill it in advance. And one of the things you can do to save yourself a lot of headache is don't start talking about yourself. The first meeting should be almost 100%, 95, 97% the prospect talking, you asking questions, taking notes. The marketing that you send them in advance, let that do the work of telling them your story and what you're about. I mean, they already have some interest or they wouldn't have asked you to come in the first place. So don't use that meeting time to raise a bunch of objections by just talking about yourself and everything you do. And then number 5 is don't try and answer every objection the minute it comes up. So instead of getting sort of belligerent, I don't know if belligerent is the right word, but in some cases it is. I've seen salespeople where the minute they go into a sales meeting and the prospect raises an objection, like, I'm just going to tell you right now, we don't have the money for this. And I've gone into meetings where that was like the first thing the prospect said. I'll listen to what you have to say, but I'm going to tell you right now it's not in the budget. Part of you, what most people want to do is jump on that objection right away and start trying to, well, what do you mean, what is your budget? Or they try and, try to overcome that. Or the prospect might sit down and say, well, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not signing any kind of long-term contract. So, instead of jumping on that objection right away, sometimes you might just ignore it. Now, I don't mean ignore it like pretend like the prospect never said it. You might say, okay, well, I'll note that that's important to you, but let me understand a little bit more about you before we make a recommendation. If you think about like when you go into a doctor's office and you sit down with the doctor, and if first meeting the doctor, he comes in and he's looking at my chart, and let's say my elbow hurts, and I'm like, Doc, my elbow hurts, but I'm telling you right now, I don't want any needles, I don't want any surgery. Okay, I don't want any pills either. So, what the doctor would most likely say is not start going, well, hang on a minute there, Robin, we're going to have to do needles or pills or surgery or whatever before. And he would start, no doctor would do that. They'd say, okay, I'll note that, but let me take a look at what's going on and understand what's going on better before we start dealing with that aspect of it. And that's exactly how a doctor would deal with it, because they take that consultative approach. And I'm recommending that when you're meeting with prospects, if they start firing an objection, what you might say is, okay, I'll note that, and if anything, I might get curious. So going back to the budget question, you might say, okay, well, so I understand there's some budgetary concerns. Can I ask why that is? get a little bit of history on them, why they feel that way. Sometimes people just feel like they've got to put that up front because you're a salesperson and I know you're going to talk me into something I might not want to do. So again, don't try and jump on every objection the second it comes up. Understand it, get curious. Why do they feel that way? What's been their history and their past experience? And then when you have that information, then that could often help you later on in the sales process when you're making your presentation or making a recommendation. You can address what's important to them and all their concerns. Because again, an objection is just that. It's just a concern. It's an unanswered question. So hopefully those tips have helped. I would put that into play, and then I'm going to come back on the next blog post and we're going to give you a little script for how to overcome objections. So this is Robin signing off.